When a person becomes enlightened, they will never return to their previous state of ignorance. They will live a completely new life, as if reborn, gaining another chance at life. What creates the gap between people is the level of enlightenment in their minds. Ancient wisdom greets you all. Today, we will explore 7 enlightening stories to help you immediately recognize the truth and no longer feel lost. If you can understand the stories below, it means you have achieved enlightenment. If not, that's okay, it simply means your time for enlightenment has not yet come. The first story is about the power of the present. In a remote temple, there lived an old monk and a young novice. The old monk had achieved enlightenment, while the young novice had not. One day, the young novice asked his master, "Master, what is the difference before and after enlightenment?" The old monk replied, "Before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water." The young novice was confused. "So, there's no difference before and after enlightenment?" The old monk explained, "Before enlightenment, you chop wood to carry water to cook rice. After enlightenment, chopping wood is just chopping wood, carrying water is just carrying water, cooking rice is just cooking rice." The young novice grew even more puzzled. "Then what's the difference?" The old monk replied, "If you go up the mountain just to chop wood, the journey will be painful. If you chop wood just to cook rice, the task will feel exhausting. It's like people who work just to earn money, their work feels burdensome. But if work is just work, it won't feel painful anymore." The old monk continued, "When you go up the mountain just to chop wood, you miss the beautiful scenery along the way. But if going up the mountain is just going up the mountain, you'll enjoy the beauty along the path. Life is like this. If a person lives their life, studying just to get a good job, working just to earn money, earning money just to buy a house and car, and then buying a house and car just to show success, and success just to buy a better house and car, repeating endlessly, their whole life will be filled with suffering. Those who achieve great success focus their minds on one goal. Those who follow the wrong path are full of desires, while ordinary people are mindless. All suffering stems from not understanding human nature, and all poverty comes from not comprehending emotions. Once, Master Yuan Xiao went out, and it was already night. He was both hungry and thirsty. In the wilderness, where could he find water to drink? When he was extremely thirsty, he saw a puddle by the roadside and bent down to drink. Immediately, the water felt as sweet as nectar. He drank to his heart's content, feeling extremely comfortable. Afterward, Master Yuan Xiao rested under a tree for the night, planning to continue his journey the next morning. At dawn, he returned to the spot where he had drunk water the night before and was shocked to find the puddle full of dead insects. At that moment, a feeling of disgust overwhelmed him. He wanted to vomit all the water he had drunk the night before. In an instant, the sweet sensation from the night before and the current disgust intertwined. At that very moment, he suddenly awakened. The sweet feeling of the rainwater from the night before and the disgust from the dead insects in the morning were merely products of his discriminating mind. From this, he realized that all things in the world, good or bad, are just different perceptions of people. This is what the Avatamsaka Sutra refers to. If you want to understand, everything is reflected from the mind. The mind shapes the world, the Dharma body is as the mind is, the mind's appearance is as the Dharma's appearance. The second story is about whether to strive hard or live indifferently. Once, a student asked Zhuangzi, "In society, how can one stand firm? What attitude should one maintain?" Zhuangzi replied, "Follow me into the mountains, and we'll learn as we go." They reached the mountainside and encountered a group of people cutting wood. Zhuangzi said, "Pay attention to the characteristics of the trees being cut." The students replied, "The trees being cut are usually straight, suitable for beams, chairs, or boats. They are all useful trees." Zhuangzi then asked, "Then why is that large tree by the roadside not being cut?" A student ran to ask the woodcutter. The woodcutter replied, "Don't you know this tree? It's a stinking spring tree, its smell is unpleasant, its trunk is crooked, Its grain uneven, completely useless. I cut useful trees, why would I cut a useless one? Thus, this tree could grow large and lush. Zhuangzi said, this is the law of nature. Useful trees are cut, useless trees are preserved. He continued, talented people are often overworked, while the less talented remain safe until retirement. The students said, then we should hold back and not show too much talent to avoid being exploited and exhausted. Zhuangzi smiled, you've only understood half of it, there's a more important half. They continued climbing the mountain and came across a small house with many geese. The host saw Zhuangzi and invited him, don't go any further today, I'll treat you to a pot of stewed goose. Zhuangzi and his students stood watching as the host chased the geese to select a suitable one. The scene was chaotic, with geese flapping and dogs barking, the geese scattering in all directions. But only one goose stood at the door, not fleeing, not afraid, calm and composed. Strangely, the host did not catch this goose. The students quickly asked the host why. The host explained, you don't know, but among these geese, some can honk, some cannot. This goose honks beautifully, its sound like a mountain stream, like music. I can't bear to kill it. Those without any talent are stewed for food. The talented goose is kept, the untalented are killed. Zhuangzi asked, what do you learn from this? The students replied, we need to cultivate our talents, to excel, because those without talent are eliminated. The talented are kept and developed. Zhuangzi smiled, then think back, what did you say earlier? Useful trees are cut, useless trees thrive. Now you say the talented are kept, isn't that contradictory? So, should one be talented or not? Zhuangzi explained, the key lies in knowing the time and the situation. Like the saying the dragon and the snake's transformation, a gentleman needs the wisdom of both the dragon and the snake. When the opportunity arises, transform into a dragon, soaring through the clouds, displaying your talents, creating wonders. But when conditions are unfavorable, like a drought, turn into a snake, hide in the grass, live with insects, dwell in muddy burrows, eat simple food to survive. When you're a snake, don't feel humiliated or resentful for having been a dragon. He continued, when encountering leaders who envy talent, like the woodcutter, hold back. When meeting leaders who value talent, like the goosekeeper, showcase your talents. Ultimately, whether to hold back or shine depends on your environment. Zhuangzi concluded, be flexible like the dragon and the snake, adapt according to circumstances. Learn and progress together. The third story is about mindset, the empty boat. Do you believe that 98% of a person's fate is not determined by circumstances but by mindset? In fact, a person's whole life is spent paying for their mindset, but often we don't realize it. Have you heard of the theory of the empty boat, which has existed for over 2,000 years? In Zhuangzi's book, there's a small story about a man whose boat capsized on a river, and he saw another boat heading towards him. He shouted to warn them, but no one responded. Angry, he started cursing the boatman. But when the boats collided, he discovered it was just an empty boat, with no one on it. Immediately, his anger vanished, he no longer felt angry. In reality, whether you get angry or not depends entirely on whether there's someone on the boat. Most of the time, you get angry not because others have greatly harmed you, but because you can't accept their behavior. Many people often complain, how are you driving? Why aren't you queuing? Are you blind? You stepped on my foot. These outbursts of anger stem from your preconceived notion that others should behave according to your values. When they don't meet your expectations, you feel uncomfortable. The more they deviate from your values, the angrier you get. Think about it, if a 5-year-old child cuts in line, you won't get angry. If a kitten steps on your foot, you won't get angry either. In these cases, you don't impose your values on them, you don't expect them to follow the rules. In such situations, you should treat those who annoy you like empty boats without a helmsman. Understand that you can't expect others to share your values, and you won't be hurt by anyone. Wang Yongming once said, a person's whole life seems to handle many different things, But in reality, they are always facing their own emotions and perceptions. Suppose you drive a car worth 50 million dong to a party where people discuss cars. They say, cars worth 50 million dong aren't worth driving. Weak engines, not beautiful, the car emblem looks faceless. How would you feel then? But if you drove a car worth 1 billion dong, how would you feel hearing those words? The problem is, the party is still the party, the speakers are the same, the words haven't changed. So why does your perception differ? Think about a durian seller. For 30 years, they've been selling durians on a street corner. Some people love the taste of durian, others can't stand it. But the flow of people continues, and the durian business sustains their livelihood. Those who like durian keep eating, those who hate it still hate it. Nothing changes. If you understand this principle, you will achieve true maturity. In fact, apart from physical pain caused by illness, all other perceptions are just your mental constructs, not truly existing. They arise from delusions and activities outside human nature. The external material world is one, but in each person's heart, there exists a unique world. And they are different. This is what Wang Yongming called nothing outside the mind. Beyond the mind, there is no real matter. The sky is just the sky, it doesn't represent freedom. The sea is just the sea, it has nothing to do with tolerance. A car worth 50 million or 1 billion is just a car, it doesn't represent your personality or wisdom. When you see through this essence, you will comfortably navigate all emotions, no longer suffering from personal perceptions. Then, a person becomes so strong that nothing can defeat them. They can interact with everyone, handle any problem. This is the power from Wang Yongming's heart. The fourth story, if you knew you would fail, would you still do it? Suppose your house is on fire. Someone grabs a bucket of water to put out the fire, while another just stands there watching. In the end, even the person with the bucket couldn't extinguish the fire. The house still burned down. Do you think the person with the bucket and the one who stood by are the same? Mosey once faced a similar problem. He traveled everywhere promoting his doctrine of universal love, opposing mutual harm. One day, someone asked Mosey, "Sir, you travel everywhere, tirelessly preaching universal love, but have you changed the world?" As for me, standing aloof, coldly observing the world, not intervening, has the world become worse? It seems the world hasn't improved because of you, nor worsened because of me. So, what's the difference between you and me? This question was actually sarcastic, implying that knowing you can't succeed but still trying is worthless. So, what do you think, who is more valuable, someone who tried their best but failed, or someone who saw from the start that it was impossible and did nothing? If you're puzzled by this, see how Mosey answered. He said, "Suppose a house is on fire, I grab a bucket to save it, while you just stand there watching. In the end, the house burns down, and I couldn't save it. Are we the same? If you think so, let me ask another question. What if that house was yours? Then you'd think differently. When your house is on fire, if neighbors come with water to help, even if they can't put out the fire, your heart would feel warm. But if everyone just stood by, your heart would turn cold. So, why do we need attitude? Attitude isn't necessarily about achieving results but about bringing hope to the world. It's attitude that brings warmth to life. When attitude disappears, the world turns cold. When spring comes, as long as heaven and earth bestow warmth, everything naturally blooms, plants sprout, crops grow. As the climate changes, the world becomes more vibrant. Therefore, if you want your life to be like spring, you must maintain an attitude. Attitude is the vitality of your life. Just as warmth is the vitality of heaven and earth. If something doesn't succeed, between not trying and failing after effort, though the result is the same, the essence differs. Effort brings experience, and that experience exists in the result. Failure after effort is passionate failure, it's like embers that can reignite. The fifth story, enduring suffering doesn't lead to enlightenment. In Buddhism, the first enlightened one was Shakyamuni, the the Buddha. Under what circumstances did he achieve enlightenment? When he was still a prince, once he passed through the eastern gate of the palace and saw an old, frail man. At the southern gate, he saw a sick man lying weakly. At the western gate, he encountered a dead man, with his family grieving beside him. That night, Prince Shakyamuni couldn't sleep. He pondered, wondering why the world was filled with so much suffering. He decided to abandon his luxurious life, renounce his noble status, quietly leave the palace, shave his head, and choose the path of asceticism to seek the truth. His name was changed to Shakyamuni, and his original name was Siddhartha Gautama. He began his journey to find answers, setting foot in northern Nepal, at the foot of the Himalayas. At the foot of the Himalayas, there was a forest called the Forest of Asceticism. Many ascetic monks went there to meditate and practice asceticism. Some hung themselves upside down, some kept their arms raised without lowering them, some buried half their bodies in the ground. They believed that the way to avoid suffering was to use suffering to counter suffering, so they chose asceticism. Shakyamuni also joined the ascetics. Every day he meditated, eating only one meal with little food. This ascetic life lasted for 6 years. One day, he fainted in the forest. At that moment, he heard the sound of a lute from afar. The lute taught him a lesson. If the lute string is too tight, the sound becomes harsh. If the string is too loose, the sound is off-key. Too indulged in pleasure, people are swept into the whirlpool of profit. Too obsessed with asceticism, people are trapped in the struggle between gain and loss. Only by staying away from both extremes can one easily realize the truth. From then on, Shakyamuni abandoned asceticism, seeking a balance between the two extremes. He lived like an ordinary person, following nature. With this mindset, he went to the Bodhi tree, sat under it, and began meditating. He summarized his experiences and made a vow. If not enlightened, he would not rise. On the 7th night, as he gazed at the starry sky, he finally achieved enlightenment, became the Buddha, and was known as Shakyamuni Buddha. After that, he began spreading his understanding and teachings to his first 5 disciples. However, he did not establish Buddhism himself. Buddhism was formed later by his followers. The first important point of enlightenment he conveyed was that enduring suffering doesn't lead to enlightenment. In society, praises of hardship and pain are often the most deceitful lies, turning suffering into inspirational stories to deceive the lower class. For example, a pregnant woman delivering goods in the rain at 8 months or an old man collecting scrap to support 2 grandchildren. These stories constantly remind us that there are always people suffering more than us. But as we grow up, we realize these stories are unnecessary. Plum blossoms emit fragrance because it's their nature, not because they endure the cold. The story of the ugly duckling turning into a swan or Cinderella being chosen by the prince isn't because they suffered to become outstanding but because they inherently had that value. The ugly duckling became a swan because it was always a swan. Cinderella was chosen by the prince because she was truly beautiful. Gold always shines because it's gold. No matter how much you polish it, it won't shine brighter. Never believe that suffering is valuable because suffering is just suffering. It doesn't bring success nor is it worth pursuing. Don't seek inspiration from others' suffering. People living in suffering aren't for us to empathize with or to train our willpower, it's simply because they can't avoid it. The 6th story, the enlightenment of the Buddha. What was Shakyamuni's main message upon enlightenment? It was to discover 3 things: the origin of the universe, the origin of life, and most importantly, how to eliminate all suffering. This is the attainment of Bodhi. After enlightenment under the Bodhi tree, Shakyamuni said his first words: all beings in the world possess the wisdom and virtue of the Tathagata, but due to delusions and attachments, they cannot attain the truth. This statement indicates that all life is equal and capable of enlightenment. However, due to delusions and attachments, people become ordinary mortals. The Buddha believed that the root of suffering in sentient beings stems from the cycle of rebirth in the 6 realms. The root cause of this cycle is the 3 poisons: greed, hatred, and delusion. These are the fundamental reasons why all beings suffer. To escape the cycle and suffering, one must eliminate the three poisons. Greed is the attachment to favorable conditions, always wanting to possess, unwilling to let go if not obtained. Hatred is resentment towards adversity, losing rationality and acting impulsively when things don't go as desired. Delusion is confusion, not understanding right from wrong, good from evil, leading to mistaken perceptions and distorted truths. Shakyamuni also realized that the universe wasn't created by gods. There's no deity or supreme being controlling everything. Humans aren't created by gods. When Bodhidharma arrived at Shaolin Temple, he saw many monks meditating. He asked, "What are you doing?" They replied, "We're meditating." He asked again, "What is the purpose of the heavenly determination?" They replied, "To become a Buddha, to see one's own nature." Bodhidharma said nothing. The next day, he picked up a piece of jade and polished it on a stone. The others were surprised and asked, "What are you doing?" He replied, "I am polishing it to make a mirror." Everyone laughed and said, "No matter how you paint it, it will not work." Bodhidharma replied, "If polishing a jade cannot make it curved, then how can you become a Buddha by sitting in meditation forever?" This story is an enlightenment, helping people realize the nature of heavenly determination. What is refining? It is not necessary to sit quietly for 15 minutes, half an hour or even 2 hours to the point of being numb. If your heart is still busy, accepting, full of thoughts that cannot be abandoned, then sitting in meditation for 3 years is useless. Zen is really a way of life. Even when you cook in the kitchen, you can also be enlightened, you can also become a Buddha. Even humans will experience all kinds of thoughts and emotions. But the important thing is not to resist them. Allow all forms to come out, accept everything that exists. Cultivation is not asceticism or destiny to reach gods and Buddhas, but to train yourself in daily life, to eliminate the three poisons. Story 7, Are You Afraid of Death? Zhuangzi also has a profound view of death. He once used a story to illustrate. Once upon a time, there were 4 Americans, one of whom had a valid flag. Her father was a member of the border guard. Since childhood, she lived in the wilderness, never seeing a flower, and did not even know that she was very beautiful. One day, the king of Jin went on a tour and saw the girl being brought into the palace. The girl was straight because she had to leave her parents. But when she arrived at the palace, she was fed delicious food, slept on a bed of love, and immediately thought, "If only I had known in advance, I would not have answered." Zhuangzi said, "How do people know that death is painful? Perhaps after death, I will live in the palace, then I will regret not coming sooner." However, Zhuangzi did not encourage suicide. When he was near death, his students were very sympathetic. Someone asked, "Teacher, you are a learned man, but life has suffered too much damage. Therefore, when the teacher passes away, they will invite friends and organize a really important monk ceremony for him." Zhuangzi replied, "No need. Heaven and earth are my talents. The sun and the moon are the decorations on the coffin. All things are the items offered. Do I need another monk ceremony? The necessary things can be left in the wilderness." The students were worried, but by doing so, they would support the teacher and end up eating his body. Zhuangzi laughed, "If the experts from our mouths support the eagle and the fruit and then bury us in the ground for the ants to eat, then the little ones favor the ants more?" Zhuangzi talks about his body as if the teacher is talking about something unrelated. When you understand the truth, you will realize that your care or lack of care cannot change the job. Instead of worrying, try to understand the meaning of life. As long as you are alive today, there must be a reason to exist there. According to the records in Zhuangzi's self-lecture, when Zhuangzi's wife passed away, his old lover, Huizi, came to visit. Seeing Zhuangzi sitting in the game, betting on money and singing, Huizi was naturally the champion of hooking. "Your wife married you, gave birth to children, raised a family, and worked hard to take care of you all her life. Now that she has passed away, you are not too much. Behind this, You still import singing, it is really unacceptable. Zhuangzi replied, when my wife just passed away, how could I not be sad? But thinking carefully, before she had life, there was no body, no tools, no form. From nothingness came a jar, then a form, there was energy, there was life. Now returning to nothingness, thinking must be like spring, summer, autumn, and winter always changing. Life is a journey, death is returning home. My wife has now returned home to rest peacefully, while I sit here crying and resenting. Must it be really funny? From a broader perspective, death is also life, life is also death. Between life and death, there is only one path without separation, without a starting point or an ending point. Understanding this principle, you will not be too happy when coming to life, nor will you consider death a disaster.